So first information is a lot of just preliminary vocabulary terms. So we're just talking about mean and standard deviation. So those will come up here. You've likely heard of mean before. So measures of center and measures of spread or variation are often called descriptive statistics. So you're comparing a set of data. To analyze data sets, we often look at their distribution or how they're spread out, which is a graph or a table that shows theoretical frequency of each possible data value. So we're going to get in more of the shapes of what the graphs will look like tomorrow and visualizing those. But it has a what's called a symmetric or normal distribution. If you can kind of draw this nice, called a bell curve over the top of it. So it has a nice almost triangular shape to it. So very data heavy in the middle and then only a little bit on the outside, versus if it's skewed, it's heavy one way or the other. And that would depend on if there's outliers or numbers greater than or less than the rest of the data. So this would be asymmetric, these would be skewed either positively or negatively. But we'll talk more about the shapes of that tomorrow. A bimodal distribution has two distinct peaks. When a distribution is symmetric, the mean accurately reflects the center of the data. So there's nothing really pulling it either direction. Everything's very balanced. When the distribution is skewed, the mean is not as reliable. So outliers are extremely high or low values when compared to the rest of the values in the data set and have a strong effect on the average of the data set. So for example, if we took a quiz and let's say most people got A's and B's, but one person got a 23%. That is going to pull the mean down, okay? So the average would not be the most accurate reflection of the data. I would probably look at the median, which is what half of the people did, okay? So outliers will pull it down and it will skew it one way or the other. I kind of summarize that. Symmetric distribution, the data distributed symmetrically. Center is measured with the mean, and the spread, so how evenly distributed they are, is measured with variance and standard deviation. Standard deviation is somewhat related to range, but it's how each value is spaced out. So we'll talk about percentages and percentiles tomorrow. But that's where standard deviation is coming from, is how it is spread out versus the range. It's a little bit different, okay? So on the notes for 2 out of the 3 examples, I put calculator kind of screen grabs on there so that you can see what you should be looking at. Also, I'm going to write on there, so we're not going to use all the numbers that end up showing up, just some of them. But this process, so you'll be given a list of numbers. This is going to be on your test on Monday. You'll be given a list of numbers. You need to memorize that process. I'm not going to tell you the keystrokes come Monday. Okay. Now, it's very repetitive today, so you'll probably get fairly used to it. And then also, I'd recommend resetting the calculator each time. So again, second, plus, 7, 1, 2. There's just less issues that way, especially with newer calculators. The older calculators actually cooperated a little bit easier last hour than the new ones. Okay. So we are going to enter this list of numbers in. All right, so the buttons are on here. So we're going to hit stat, edit, enter all of these numbers in no particular order, as long as you get all of them, into list 1, and then we'll calculate the statistics for it. Okay. So stat is to the right of the green alpha button. It's already on edit, so go ahead and hit enter. So if you reset the calculator, this should all be blank. Now in L1 or list 1, type in all the numbers. So you'll hit 26, enter, 12, enter. Make sure you get them all. Make sure you don't skip any. Make sure you don't duplicate, like enter it in twice by accident. You should have the exact same number of data values on your paper as you do in your calculator. So although I put what is going to show up on the calculator screen on your paper, you need to be able to do this on a test. So I would practice it either way. And it's on your homework tonight also. Alright. So once you get to the bottom, it actually numbers the rows. So this blank one that I have up here highlighted black, that would be item 16. So that's telling me I've entered in 15. At that point, I would go back and count, make sure you have 15 numbers. Okay? Because if you forgot one or typed one in twice, it's gonna throw off all the data. So is everyone at this point? Go back to stat, so hit the stat button again. You're gonna arrow over to the calc menu, so it's on the edit menu now, calc. And you're gonna hit option 1, so it's already on there, hit enter. Now if you have an older calculator, it just says one variable stats across the top. You need to enter in list 1. Okay, on the newer calculators, it's already like that, but I can do it anyway. So it is second, and then 1, so it's the blue option for the number 1. It says L1 down here. Okay. And it will type in list 1. So if you have the older calculator, across the top, it should say one variable stats L1. And you can hit enter. So my screen is the newer calculators, so wherever yours may fall. And this is the information that shows up. And it should match what's on your paper. Okay, so at least make sure everything matches. Okay. Now I'm just gonna go off the one on my paper because it has the same set of information. So, let me minimize that, okay. Now right here on the sentence right above where I wrote how to reset the calculator, the mean is represented by the X with the bar over it. Tomorrow the mean will be represented by the Greek letter mu. Okay. Have you ever heard of that before? You'll see it again tomorrow if you don't know. But the calculator doesn't really write a mu, so the mean is going to be in the first row, and it's the X with the bar over top of it. Now standard deviation is denoted right here. Does anyone know what this Greek letter is? Right here, it says O with a little tail on it. That's sigma. Okay, so if you see the word sigma, that is standard deviation, and that is right here above n. So if you ever heard of fraternities or sororities with sigma in it, that's the symbol they're going to use for that. Okay. So mean is the X with the bar over it. Now up here it says round to the nearest tenth. I kept it tenth in your notes today. Most of the ones in your homework is tenth, but some of them say hundredth or thousandth, so make sure to read that appropriately, otherwise it'll mark you wrong if you don't round it correctly. So the mean would be what to the nearest tenth? 18.1. What about standard deviation? The nearest tenth. 3.7. Now, as you're entering in these numbers aren't really spread very much. So what's the lowest number? 12, and then it goes up to 26. Those are pretty close together overall. So the lower the standard deviation is, the more close together the values are. Okay, and we'll get to some comparisons at the end. Again, we're going to talk about more what standard deviation looks like in a visual aspect on a histogram, which is those bar graphs at the top. But today we're just focusing on the numerical values of them. Questions? Now go ahead and reset the calculator before we do the next one, just to make sure, especially if you have a new one. For some reason it's slightly off on the numbers. So I'm gonna do the same, so you can just clear this off, second plus 712, and you hit clear or enter after that. Okay. Then we'll go on to the next example. Bless you. This one I did not put a calculator screen grab, so we need to make sure that we're all pretty much getting the same thing. I actually want to check this, especially for those of you with the newer calculators. So, stat, edit. Now, if you don't reset the calculator, you would clear out the list by going up to the list name, hitting clear and enter, and it'll wipe it. But if you just want to reset the calculator every single time, it'll take care of that for you. All right, so go ahead and enter those in. I mostly want to compare what I'm getting versus what you guys are getting. Make sure you get the exact same number of numbers that you're inputting. So I've entered in 12, this Blackboard will be 13, and I have 12 numbers on my paper. So I'll just count that just to make sure. Now what? From memory. Stat?
Stat.
Calc. Basically just say enter. If you have an older calculator, put in list 1, so second 1. If you have a newer calculator, it's already automatically that way. On our last example, we're going to be comparing 2 different ones, so we will have to change the name. on those. No, this is, okay. So if I did not reset my calculator, it actually last hour rounded my mean up to 58. That's why you want to reset it every time, especially if you have a newer one. So just be safe to keep all the decimals the same. Okay. Did anyone not reset their calculator? Okay. So you get something different? Okay. So the older calculators, they seem to be pretty consistent. It's the newer ones. I think it's dumb that the software is different, but that's what it is. So what would the mean be to the nearest tenth? 57.2. So in your homework, you're gonna have problems. It's gonna give you a list of numbers. It's gonna say mean, you have a box, you gotta type it in. Standard deviation, you have a box, you gotta type it in. So what's the standard deviation? That is 5.7, right? Yep. So 5.65 would round up to 5.7. So that was without the little screen grab on your paper. So did everyone duplicate that, okay? It is your job to memorize that process. It's not a hard one, but you will have to do it on your test on Monday, and if you tell me you forget, I'm just gonna shrug at you. Okay, so remember how to do it. Okay. Questions before the last one? Now the last one, I did do screen grabs, but I want you to make sure that you can duplicate the same information. So we have two different classes here. So we're going to compare the mean and standard deviations of them. So we're going to enter in Mr. Jackson's class into list 1. Now reset the calculator before you do that, just to kind of ensure everything's clean. So second plus 712. All right. So we're going to enter in Jackson's 20 scores in list 1 and Miss Hetrick's class scores, those 20 into list 2. You will have to calculate the two different stats separately, hence the two calculator screens on your paper, but I'll show you how to do that. So just keep track of which one you're doing. It does not matter the order of the numbers, so if you're going across the rows, it doesn't matter as long as you get all the numbers in. Okay, so make sure you get 20 in each of them. So this is you practicing to try and solidify this process in your head. And then arrow over to list 2 to enter in the second class scores. So make sure you have 20 in each one. As you're entering these in, what do you guys notice about the difference in the scores? What class did better? Jackson's class, for sure.
There you go.
Thank you. Make sure you have the same amount there. So we're gonna do this one at a time. So you're gonna do the list 1 first, which is kind of automatic. So as you with older calculators, make sure to do second 1 for list 1. All right, and that should be the same information in the first screen grab on your paper. So just compare the two, just make sure. Now if you're pulling up Miss Hetrick's, you clear this out, stat, calculate, one variable stats, and you change this to list 2, which would be second 2 instead. So if you're just comparing different lists, then that information should pull up. Okay. So to change the list name, it's second 1, second 2, second 3 if it's list 3, and so on. Okay. And it does say that in this little thing on your paper right here. It does tell you how to do that, but so since we have both screen grabs here, okay, so Mr. Jackson's class has a mean score of what? Whether you're looking at the calculator or just the paper up here. What's the mean of Jackson's class? 93.2, and standard deviation is what? 2.3. Now that is very small, 2.3, which means the numbers are pretty close together, which they're not very spread out in that one. It seems like everybody pretty much got an A, except for maybe 1 or 2 people. What is Hetrick's mean score? 79.9. And standard deviation on this one is a 7.2, which means it's more spread out overall. Okay. So this should have been pretty obvious. Whose class scored higher on average? Mean is the higher, so Mr. Jackson. And the scores in Miss Hetrick's class were more spread out. So way more spread out on those. But the standard deviation shows somewhat the spread. We'll talk about tomorrow the percentiles of that. So you need to know those keystrokes by your test at the latest, but you'll do it several times for your homework. Okay. Yeah. They just keep coming up with Jackson. So you want to make sure to do, so you'll pull up the one variable stats, but you have to make it list 2 instead of list 1. So if you, do you guys have the older ones in front of you? So it says one variable stats. You have to put in list 2, so you do second and then 2, and it should write list 2 right after it. So it'll say one variable stats across the top, and then list 2 will be like right here. So click one variable stats. So when it just is that across the top of the screen, then do second 2. Okay. So I'll post your homework in a second, but you need to get to this screen, and it'll be right here. There are 6 problems, mean and standard deviation. Okay. Make sure you pay attention to what you're rounding to, because it is different.